I've got rooms, I got a couple of badges, little all back there. There's some locker rooms on the right-hand side of that hallway. You can open the door. If not, you can go all the way out by the stairway. There are open restrooms over there. Coffee's done, snacks on the table, help yourself. If you have any questions, it's kind of all our staff on the wall. So ask us, we'll help you out. Turn over to Brad.
All right. Okay, Connor, can you put the first two slides up?
Yeah, real quick, can everybody that's online, can you hear me all right? I got a thumbs up from Dan, thank you. Okay, here you go, Brad. I don't know, what's that?
Now, I'll just have you run the.
Yeah. I don't want to do that. I didn't want to write it.
All right.
That's the last.
That's the one. We'll go ahead and kick it off. We got a good group here. Thank you, everybody, for coming. This is awesome. We've got some folks online too, and that, so we'll kind of try to interact back and forth and do that. So just a little bit of background in that, going back to the 2018 Farm Bill. There was a provision in the 2018 Farm Bill to dedicate funding towards source water protection. And we'll get into some of the numbers. We'll get into more of those details in that here in a little bit. But just to be clear, this is a subcommittee. It's the USDA agency. It's a subcommittee of the State Technical Committee. And anytime there is a need to experts provide guidance to the state conservationists and to the full State Technical Committee, we set up these subcommittees. So there is some structure to the subcommittees in that, but generally the basis of it is to just get the experts together, get recommendations on how we can target our funding till we get through the Farm Bill program. And that's a wide gamut of things that we do, from practices to targeting. This is a voluntary incentive-based process that we use, we go through. So we will be, again, at the end of the meeting, I think we'll talk about how often we meet, and different things that we can do to make this effective. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So a little bit of history. Of course, we've had the State Technical Committees meet, for forever, since the Farm Bill has been implemented. But specifically to water quality, with the 2018 Farm Bill, as I mentioned, there was a provision to address source water, drinking water within the country. And there was a mandate to set aside 10% of our total funding that we receive for source water protection. I'll talk a little bit more about that later as well. So as a result of the 2018 Farm Bill and this provision of 10%, back in 2019, we started with we just called it a steering committee. So, we needed to move quick. And, we had to set up priority areas. It was part of the statute, within the state. The priority areas could not exceed 20% of the total land area, in the state. And so, we set up this steering committee, and we've met a couple times this summer of 2019. And some of you in here and online were, part of that steering committee. And we will, cover after a while, a little bit of what we came up with for those priority areas. And, so then, if you remember, 2019 was just crazy. We had blizzards, we had floods, we had, lots of stuff, and we were doing emergency programs and different things. So, and then COVID hit, and it was tough to meet, it was tough to get together, and a lot going on. But we had intended, since 2019, we set up the Source Water Protection Subcommittee in 2020, and we met. But then we had intended to broaden the scope, from just, drinking water, from 2019, because it's all interconnected, right? And, we had talked for a few years about, we just need a water quality focused subcommittee that we can look at both, surface water, and groundwater. So, we started those conversations, I think about in December of 2020, and we're just getting now to the point of, okay, this is the inaugural water quality subcommittee meeting. And it's a combination, it's not just source water, drinking water, but it is surface water, and it takes in the whole thing. So their source water protection, part of the Farm Bill, will be a part of this committee, the task to come up with recommendations, how we're gonna handle that. But then also, we're bringing in the surface water and the source water priority areas in connection with our National Water Quality Initiative. So, we'll be talking about that here this morning. NWQI has been authorized since 2012 in the Farm Bill. So we're hoping to get a total look at water quality and quantity, and to some extent here, with this committee. So, with that, I'm going to, I think we should have introduction. And if, we'll just kind of go around, I think we'll start here in the room. For those online, when we're done here in the room, we'd just like everybody to, say who you are, who you're with, and, maybe just a little bit of background, but, we'll just move around the room so everybody knows, who's involved. And when we're done here in the room, then we'll ask those online, to come off camera and unmute and introduce yourself. So I'll start. I'm Brad Sonkson. I'm the Assistant State Conservationist for Programs, for the state of Nebraska here. And my responsibilities are, to implement the conservation provisions of Farm Bill as they come out. And, equips, ESP, easements, and all of that, which all of those programs contribute to the source water protection. So with that, maybe we'll just start over here.
JC Schaefer, Vice President of Government Affairs for Nebraska Cattlemen. I hold our natural resources portfolio, where we've dug pretty deep into protecting groundwater, and then just also anything natural resources and environment.
I'm Jamie Taney. I actually am a resource conservationist in the Walking Field office. So I've been working with NWQI and Elmer Trailer since 2012 in the Lower Platte North NRE. Also been currently serving as the small scale farm and urban ag conservationist for NRCS and assisting with some new projects there. And I have a co-lateral position as the state beginning farmer rancher coordinator for USDA Nebraska. Thanks for being here.
I'm Brock Johnson. I'm the outreach coordinator for NRCS here in Lincoln. And I started my career working with the Leaky Underground Storage Tank Division here, a private consultant moving tanks. So that's how I cut my teeth to get started. I worked for Lower Alcorn NRD, UNL Conservation Survey, now 21 years with the agency with NRCS.
I'm Brett Weiser. I'm the State Resource Conservationist with NRCS here in Lincoln. I supervise a team of 7 of our state technical specialists. Everybody from a water quality specialist, a biologist, range management specialist, and so forth.
I'm Tammy Sims, Programs Initiatives Coordinator, under Brad's on the program staff. And what I do is help coordinate these types of projects as well as some of our other FA programs, basically mostly the Regional Conservation Partnership Program.
Good morning. My name is Aaron Hurd. I'm the State Soil Health Specialist for NRCS Nebraska. I've been in this position for 7 years, and I'm representing the Soils Department today. The state soil scientists couldn't be here today, and we're engaged in a lot of soil health related projects with UNL and other partnerships. And we're all focused on water quality. And so I'm really excited to be here and see how we can partner in the future.
I'm Tammy Nordman. I am the administrative assistant for the Soils, Wetlands, and Programs Division for NRCS.
Good morning, Connor Ward. I'm the EQIP Program Manager for the NRCS underneath Brad.
Andy Kale, Indy Public Drinking Water. I supervise our field staff, operator training, and capacity development programs.
I'm Sam Capps. I'm the coordinator for the Republican Basin with DNR, but for this purposes, I'll just be the representative for DNR. I used to do the wellhead protection and source water protection, so I'm just gonna be the one for our agency to join. I guess one thing to think about, we did get the appointment from the legislature to start a healthy soils initiative last year, so that might be something that we can tie into this effort as well.
Laura Johnson, I'm the division administrator for drinking water and groundwater of NDE. I've been here for 10 years, worked in planning for and now groundwater and drinking water.
I'm Tara Anderson. I'm the Water Quality Standards Coordinator at NDE. I've been with the agency since 2016, and I started in the state revolving fund section. And I guess my background is in aquatic ecology.
My name is Anthony Candelas. I am in the Clean Water Act 404 section. Came over from the NPDES and state permits section. A little bit of background. I come from mostly a compliance and scientist with sampling. As my previous background before I started here at the department. That's around 5 months ago.
I'm Taylor Benzel. I also work in drinking water. I'm the team lead for monitoring and compliance. Been here for about 3 years.
I'm Marty Staney. I'm the environmental director for the city of Hastings. I've been with Hastings Utility, City of Hastings since 1989, and been working with groundwater and lots of environmental issues that plague us in the city of Hastings area.
I'm Tatiana Davila. I think I know most of you in the room. I am the source water protection and wellhead protection coordinator here at the state. My background is in hydrogeology and groundwater modeling. So really excited for everyone to be here.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Nick Ehrman. I'm the Water Resources Coordinator for the Lower Platte South Natural Resources District here in Lincoln. I oversee our water quality and quantity management programs. Come to this position by way of a lot of different places, the State Association Resources District. The old agency, I'm old enough to remember when I came to it, it was the Department of Environmental Control, and then it was the Department of Environmental Quality. So been around the block for a while.
I'm Craig Romery. I work for the Nebraska Department of Agriculture. I work in the pesticide program as an environmental specialist. I deal with water quality, work on our newsletter. I administer the Nebraska Buffer Strip program and other things.
Albert Trailer, I've been here in the non-point source program since '92, so kind of evolved with that. And I've been that career, I've kind of been a point person working with NRCS, water quality issues.
Sarah Skarowska, I'm the NDE Planning and Aid Division Administrator. One of the programs in my division is our water planning section, which houses our water quality standards, non-point source program, integrated report. Also in our division, we have our energy programs, our waste and litter grants, and our state revolving fund. And I'm here to get educated, so.
I'm Laura Negengas. I'm an extension educator out of UNL, but my position is also funded by NDE. I also work with UNMC a lot. My background is in public health, so kind of came to this position because during grad school I was working a lot on a research team studying water quality and how that's impacting human health. So kind of working in that area.
I'm Zach Reed. I'm here with the Section 319 non-point source program here at NDE. I'm one of the project managers, and I'm pretty much here to learn and eventually take over probably for Albert.
Goodbye.
Annette Beck, General Manager of the Lewis and Clark NRD, and we've been busy working with water quality in the Lewis and Clark NRD for at least the past 20 years with the Brazil groundwater management area, and we cooperate with 3 other neighboring NRDs. And we just are facing that issue more and more throughout the district and the state. So here to see what we can do about that.
Okay, thanks everybody in the room. Now we'll go to those online. And I'm just gonna go down the list as they appear on our board. So Aaron Wilkins, can you unmute and?
Yeah, I'm Erin Wilkins. I'm a water tech with the Upper Big Blue NRD in York, and I oversee pretty much all the water quality programming that we do here.
Okay, thank you, Erin. George Cunningham.
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thanks. My name is George Cunningham. I'm with the Sierra Club. I'm the conservation chair for the chapter. We are interested in seeing if we can influence how this program will address the persistent nutrient issues in the rivers and streams in the state, and hopefully move the needle a little bit on increasing the water quality benefits to those rivers and streams throughout the state.
Okay, thanks, George. Next is Greg Whitmore.
Greg Whitmore from Shelby, Nebraska. I'm representing the Nebraska Corn Growers Association. I've been members in the past of the Water Policy Task Force, the Healthy Soils Task Force, part of the National Corn Growers Soil Health Partnership, and yeah, always concerned about water and water quality.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Renee Hancock.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Renee Hancock. I'm the State Water Quality Specialist. I assist with the planning of the NWQI watershed areas with the group that we have.
Okay, thanks, Renee. Next up, Rorik Allman.
Good morning. Merry Christmas to everybody. I'm Rorik Pullman. I'm a producer from Southwest Nebraska. And I have been involved with the IMP on the Platte Basin from border to border since its inception, as well as the Republican Basin as well, and still maintain and hold those stakeholder relationships. I co-chaired the Water Sustainability Fund work and have spent a long time in water as a producer. This is will be my 38th crop. So I sit in the Twin Platte as well as the Middle and Upper Republican, and we know about the issues. And I co-chaired the Nitrate Policy Task Force and led a pretty robust discussion with NRDs and other stakeholders around this concept. And we're concerned. There is no doubt. We have implemented on our own operation. We're roughly about 6,000 irrigated acres. in that area, but we've implemented pretty much what all you're talking about: regenerative practices, no-till, limiting our nitrates or nitrogen applications and looking at alternatives and biologicals and a host of ways to help sustain and grow Nebraska's agriculture, but also be better and more responsible stewards and conservation of the resources. I also sit on the as a member of the Nature Conservancy. They have spent as well a lot of time and effort in developing and looking at these conversations. So I'm excited to be here as a producer and also as a concerned citizen. I am from out west. I would have been there today, but I had to drop my wife off for a procedure this morning. So I'm sitting in the parking lot. So I'm looking forward to today's discussions.
Thank you, Rory. Okay, next, Dan Ross.
Hey, everybody. I'm Dan Ross. I'm with the Nebraska Department of Environment and Energy. Sorry I couldn't be there today. Been dealing with a house full of sick kids all week. I am the water planning section supervisor at DEE. Been at the agency about 7.5 years or so. I'm a geologist by trade. Did about 4 years in remediation, doing groundwater, soil remediation, and then went to livestock compliance. And then now been in water planning for about the last 5 months. So I've only been on one of these technical committee meetings so far, but looking forward to see what we can do with this subcommittee. Thanks.
Thank you, Dan. I think that's everybody.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for that. It's good, I think, for everybody to kind of see who's at the table and that. And just something to think about at the end of the day. We're going to ask if there's somebody who's not here that we think should be at the table. There might be a few. So then before I turn it over to Britt, there's been a lot of publicity lately on drinking water and stuff and newspapers and that. And just coincidentally, I got the paper this morning and front page, price of clean water. And so we got a celebrity guest.
Here he is.
So a lot of information here, about the cost of cleaning up groundwater and that. So got a lot of that in the news and that. So I hope that we can have a lot of good discussion. We've got some breaks, have some presentation and then breaks, and we want input. Tammy's going to be taking notes, those kind of things, and we're just looking for guidance for what we can do as USDA for the voluntary incentive-based approach, and where are we going to target those funds to kind of keep that in mind as we go through here, and let's ask a lot of questions, have a lot of good discussion. So that, I'll just turn it over to Britt and get started.
Hold on just a second, sorry.
Well, good morning again, everybody. It's great to be here and a great turnout. I'm really pleased to see everybody in the room and more on online there. Just a couple minutes of maybe remarks before I jump into the slides. I echo a lot of what Rorik kind of mentioned there. As we go about trying to address these water quality problems, it is a real challenge because we want to move the needle, as George mentioned on there, with improving water quality. But at the same time, we don't want to have solutions that adversely impact agriculture and the ability to be profitable and feed the world, quite frankly. So therein lies the challenge. And if we look at a couple of the contaminants that we're going to talk about today, nitrogen, that's the one I'm going to be focused on a little bit here with groundwater. When you look at nitrogen, it is probably second in importance next to water on the impact it has on corn yields and other crops as well. And so it's a very delicate one, because if you get it wrong, if a farmer gets the rate or the timing or various things wrong, it can dramatically impact their bottom line. And in some cases, if it's traumatic enough, they could lose their land or lose the farm. So we want to come up with solutions that work, obviously, but also ones that are reasonable and not adversely impacted the producers. We'll later talk about surface water. If you look at one of those contaminants that are challenging, it's challenging all over the Midwest, and it's atrazine. So over 90% of the corn acres get atrazine applied to it, and there's a simple reason. It's cheap and it works. Right, Craig? It's cheap and it works. It's what you hear. And it's worked for over 60 years, right, for good weed control. So again, how do we devise solutions that don't adversely impact the ability of producers to use these important tools that they need for crop production? So therein lies our challenge. That's how I look at it, look at the world, and I thought I would just have it as a preparatory remarks. What we're going to do today, I've only got like 10 slides. We didn't want to overwhelm everybody with a lot of slides. We want to just try just enough to get everybody kind of on the same page about where we're at. But then we want at least 10, 15 minutes after each slide set, after each presentation, for feedback. That's what you're here for. We want your ideas. We've got a good cross section, and we want good ideas about how we move forward on this. So I guess I can click it from here. So groundwater, I'm not going to go into details on what that slide's all about, just to kick off there. Groundwater is extremely important in Nebraska. Nebraska is unusual. A lot of states rely more upon surface water for their source of drinking water. Nebraska, if you exclude Omaha, 95% groundwater. It's extremely important. A lot of those are small. You see there are 583 of those are under 10,000 residents. Relying upon that bad water. The primary thing we're talking about here as a problem, as we all know, is nitrates in the groundwater. Let's see here. Does this have a little? Yeah, it's got. Yes. Well, anyway, so the kind of purplish, that's where the highest levels of nitrates are up in the Northeast. We're working on that in the Brazil and other areas and along the Platte River Valley there. So nitrates is what we're after, and it's something that is a big concern, and it's been talked about for 30 years, and I think there's a lot of interest in making some improvements. So why is nitrate a problem? I think a lot of it, we look at this one here. I probably won't be able to say it well, but methemoglobinemia. If you look at that center word, hemoglobin, basically it's the nitrates interfere with the infant's ability to carry oxygen on the hemoglobin. And so you end up with what is called blue baby syndrome, which the baby can be breathing, but the oxygen's not being carried throughout the body. There's a lot of other new research going on with association with cancers and other things. So there is a particular health concern with this that we need to look at. So when I take a look at some of the key things, and this is not an exhaustive list, but just to get our brains kind of focused here, what are the kind of things that we would talk about in reducing nitrate leaching? Well, the rate of nitrogen is certainly important. The more nitrogen is supplied, the more that's out there that can leach in the groundwater. It's pretty well a linear relationship there. Or the timing of nitrogen. If we could limit the nitrogen and get most of it on in May and June, dramatically reduce the leaching. It's not out there in the environment very long. The corn crop will quickly take it up when it's actively growing in those months. Cover crops. Cover crops are very important, particularly at the end of the season. There's always going to be extra nitrogen at the end of the season. I've worked with farmers that were well below the university rate, and there's still some left at the end of the season because the soil will mineralize and produce nitrates, and if the corn crop is done taking it up, it's going to be there. And so having cover crops at the end of the season is important. I'll give you one other little snippet here. I've been working in nitrates for over 20 years. And I always used to look to the Chesapeake Bay as some of the places where you find the most current stuff. And they required nutrient management plans. They got to the point where they required those to even buy fertilizer. Now, I'm not suggesting we do that here. I'm just giving you an idea of how much they pushed things in the Chesapeake Bay. They still could not get their nitrate levels down to where they needed them to be until they started using cover crops. So you have to look at this whole system, and you have to look at where the nitrates is leaking out of that system, and cover crops are a key aspect of that. Irrigation improvements. Nebraska is the #1 state in irrigation in the country, and so irrigation is very important. There's been a lot of work. This pointer just didn't do it. This conversion of flood irrigation to sprinkler. The Central Platte NRD did quite a few studies there, and it felt like that was the #1 reason that they were reducing nitrates in their groundwater. Those that are familiar with flood irrigation, basically you have to overwater the front end or the top end of the field in order to get the water clear down to the end of the field. So the overwatering at the upper end of the field pushes nitrogen down and pushes it into the groundwater. So converting to irrigation provides a more uniform irrigation, and you have a lot less leaching. Very important. And for those that are already in sprinklers, irrigation water management, using your soil moisture probes and only watering when the crop needs it. Very important, not only for water quantity, but obviously for leaching if we reduce the amount of water being put into ground. And then growing crops with less nitrogen needs. Now, these are very difficult to get to. Some good examples would be if we could get wheat in the rotation, that'd be great. If we could get alfalfa out there and suck up the extra nitrogen from 20 feet deep, it'd be great. But they need to be as profitable as the corn soybean rotation that the producers are counting on for their livelihood. So I just left one little nugget there at the bottom. Is there a potential to add incentives to grow different crops, maybe in the wellhead areas? That's just a small part of the state. And so maybe we can do a little more enhanced efforts right there in those wellhead areas to get those alternative crops in there. Source Water Protection Initiative, as Brad mentioned, one of the requirements that came out of the 2018 Farm Bill, and 10%, minimum 10% of our programs, we tend to think of EQIP, our main cost share program, as being the main one. It also includes CSP and ASAP as our easement program. So 10% of our funds must be used for source water protection. So it's for not only water quality, but also water quantity. So we want to make sure that these sources of community water have the amount of water and the proper, quality to be able to serve the needs of the people. So community water systems in Nebraska is any system that has more than 25 people or at least 15 connections. We'll show a map here in a little bit where the wellhead protection areas are, and we also have some groundwater management areas in the state, and those are part of this priority as well. So we have enhanced incentives within this source water protection program, higher cost share rates, and a dedicated source of funding to be able to address this. So here is the map showing Nebraska with our current source water protection priority areas. All those small red polygons, if you will, that's the wellheads across the state. And I can't remember now, there's 500 and some wellheads. Do you know, Laura, what the total number is?
It's just under 600.
Just under 600. Okay. So now you see these, there's a big hashed priority area for those online there. I pointed out there in the panhandle and the upper Niagara White. It's a water quantity problem area up there. So we have those as being special parts of this as well. You can see down the upper Republican. There's a few over in the eastern part of the state. Those, my understanding is those are not long-term water quantity problems, but they're kind of confined. And so when the irrigation season hits, the water table gets dragged down pretty quickly, and it's kind of temporary, recharges fairly well. So any of these water quantity management areas are part of our priority as well. And the golden colored is where we have phase 2 and 3 nitrate areas that the NRDs are managing. So the way we set it up was the wellhead areas are high priority. So if all applicants for the program, those are funded first. And if we don't have enough of those in the wellhead areas, then we drop down to medium priority and we'll fund the ones that are in the phase 2 and 3 nitrate areas or the water quantity management areas. So we have not currently had enough applicants in the wellhead areas alone to use up all the money. So then we drop down to the medium. So that could be part of our discussion is how do we increase the amount of applications directly in those wellhead areas. So this slide here just shows you real quick where we've had our contracts. We need to get one of our GIS specialists to help us pull this together in an easier way. But this will show you where they're at. So you can see these little diamonds. These are EQIP contracts. So you can see some of these are aligning with wellhead areas. You can see them kind of overlap with some wellhead areas. But a lot of them are in kind of the medium priority, the phase 2 and 3 areas. So you can just kind of look at that map. And we have had pretty good participation in the Platte River Valley and the Northeast, where I showed the highest nitrate areas are in the state. And but we still have a lot of wellhead areas that you can see there that haven't had a contract on them yet. This gives you an idea of what the farmers are interested in and have signed up for. Irrigation water management's number one. 325 practices signed up for that. I get the question, I've had this question come up twice at the state technical committee saying, well, isn't irrigation and water quantity practice? Why are we funding that? Well, it's both. It's water quantity, certainly, but it's also water quality, because managing the water better, you reduce your leaching into the water table. Now, I want to point out the second most popular practice, conservation crop rotation. Now, before you get real excited and think there's 112 people converting their corn and soybeans to wheat, that's really not the case. In fact, I visited with Brad yesterday to make sure I was on the right track here, but what this is mostly, if not 100%, is conversion of irrigated land to dry land. And it's a temporary, it's an annual payment to convert that from irrigated to dry land. So we had to use something to put that payment scenario, what we call it, in, and it's in that conservation crop rotation, but it is not changing from corn and soybeans to a different rotation.
Chris, what's the amount? Is that the acreage?
Amount is the acres, yes. Thank you. Then you go on down the line, number 3, one is cover crops. And that's outstanding. Get a lot of interest in cover crops. Nutrient management, I'm pleased, is actually number 5 on the list. It's a hard sell. It's a little bit harder sell to local people on the fertilizer program. You can see some of the other practices, pumping plant, sprinkler system, those are all part of irrigation as well. Structure for water control, that's a fancy word for a flow meter, all right, on the sprinkler. Pest management, 21. So there we're working with some people on their herbicide program, atrazine and so forth. This TA checkout and design, this is where we have worked with people outside the agency that are certified as technical service providers. In essence, they work with us a lot in designing the subsurface drip application. So if you're curious what that is, irrigation system, micro irrigation, that is the subsurface drip irrigation systems. And then you might wonder, some of these down here, how will conservation cover, which is like planting back to grass with a field border, putting grass on the borders of a field. How does that help? Well, we put in practices that if a producer is going to go from cropland to grassland, that does provide a benefit. And so we wanted to be comprehensive with the practices we allow that have some impact. We're really hoping to get more of the irrigation and cover crop, the nutrient management and so forth, but it's in there and it does help in incremental fashion. So, let's see here. We were working on slides right till the very end yesterday, so is this a new slide?
Brett, this is Brett, this is
Yeah.
Rorik. Quick
Yes.
question.
Yeah.
As when you roll up your numbers, and I appreciate the question there, how many acres are we impacting? I think that it would be helpful to look at how many groundwater irrigated acres are there versus surface water, and look at percentages, because ultimately what we're talking about is what we'll talk about is adoption. And I think it'd be really helpful to look at that relationship of what the acres are, what the practices are, but really the stark number is the percentage of adoption. Just a quick one.
Nope, you're right on track. That'd be useful information to know. Are we at 2%, 5%, 20%? You know, what are we? So we'll take a look at that. Let's see here.
That's a Brad's slide.
That's your slide. Okay. Well, no wonder. I was thrown off. I thought you threw me a ringer there.
Don't worry, it confuses me too. So that kind of gets us through the source water protection part before we get to the discussion. But I just wanted to throw in here, so every year, we are asked to update our priority areas, update our practice list, and make any other adjustments. And so this is something that we just need to start now to talk about. So we are required to work with our drinking water partners and agencies, what we're doing it now, to have this discussion. And then by September 30th, it sounds like a long ways away, but if we're gonna do a lot of tweaks and data gathering and stuff, we've got to start now. So for 2024, everything is in place for 23 pretty much. For FY24, we need to, the map that Britt showed with the priority areas, do we want to tweak it? Do we want to change it? Do we want to have other priority areas? And so we have that discussion. And again, we can have priority areas, but it can't exceed 20% of the total cropland acres in the state. And I don't know if you caught it, but on the map, our priority areas represent 8 million acres. And I forget the total number of acres in the state, but I think that's
21 million.
Yeah, about 21 million total. So we're kind of right at that limit. So, but that's something that'll be part of the discussion, and not just here today, but the next time we meet. But by the end of the year, they will ask us if we want to make any changes to our priority areas, and we'll have to submit that. And then with that, and Britt also discussed the practices. So we have identified a list of practices. We decided not to go through extensively every one of the practices here today, but we will get into that in other meetings. It's probably good we don't list them today to kind of keep an open book on which practices. So that's part of that. We want to target additional practices. And then the source water protection gives us the opportunity to increase the payment rates on certain practices of our choosing, up to 90% of the calculated cost. So if there are practices that we think we just need to pay a little bit more to get a better implementation, we can increase those payment rates for source water protection. So practices have to relate to water quality and quantity. You know, so there are some sideboards, but like I say, we can get into that at a later meeting. So that's what we have to think about for FY24. So now I think it's open for comments and discussion. Before we go into the surface water, I guess I'll just open it up and anyone, any comments or thoughts? Source water protection, yeah.
Just a clarification, for the water protection areas, if we were to make changes, is there a particular deadline that you need like a final shape file by?
Yeah, I would think, Yeah, I mean, by early summer, by midsummer, July, that kind of time frame to get everything formatted and submitted. I say, you know, and then we don't have that directive out yet this year, but it has always been September 30th. We've had to make our changes and have them in place. So I would plan on that. So, I'm thinking, you know, the July, early August, we need to kind of have that.
Yeah, you know, I hate to be first out, but thank you for asking the first question. You know, when we talk about these water protection areas, one thing that has kind of troubled me, at least in the Hastings area, is we've got some communities that are up gradient of Hastings, and they receive the same water recharge from the Platte River from the local. But because they're smaller communities, they just don't have the resources to deal with it. The county tries to do it, the NRDs try to do it. Some of our well protection areas actually overlap a little bit, but there's some gaps in between here. Have we maybe considered, or at least in some of those areas, maybe just have more of a regional water protection area so that Hastings can help the communities like Juniata, Kennesaw, Prosser, and some of them. You know, I just, you know, I'm not offering it where we're gonna help those guys, but it seems like if they could be a voice in the room, they might see some benefit from having, you know, multiple communities working on the same problem.
So expand
Well, yeah.
to include.
Right.
Sure.
I mean,
Let's capture that. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's a great.
and I don't know if there's other places around the state, but I would assume there are some communities that, you know, they're, you know, because these wildlife protection areas were sometimes pretty rudimentary wellhead protection planning things, and maybe we didn't always look at recharge and the travel of water and so forth, which we did. We have a larger one, obviously, but so I don't know if there's any benefit in helping those smaller towns around because they contribute to the local economy and, you know.
Yeah, and in here, I mean, we're looking at the land area, I mean, for our practices and that, and obviously the water moves and flows.
I would say, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No,
I like that idea, Marty, of the, just kind of the collection of being able to partner together. However, just from a groundwater modeling standpoint, the wellhead protection areas, like, as you know, are modeled hydrogeologically. So it wouldn't be a case of like changing the wellhead protection areas to include a bigger area, but maybe when we look at priority areas, we can set it that way, but it's not necessarily.
Well, and we can, DNR does all the regional modeling, and so, I mean, we could get together and help you guys better understand where the connectivity is, where you kind of have shared aquifers and stuff. So, I mean, we could use our models to help you guys identify areas where there are greater connections between the different communities too.
And the other thing I would mention is that, you know, most of our wildlife protection areas probably could use to be remodeled. I think most of them are 20-year time of travel and we can do 50-year now. There's also several wildlife protection areas that a stream goes through the middle and there's no reason why we shouldn't look at that for a voiding system, which would again enlarge those areas.
Could you explain what that is?
Groundwater under the influence. So just thinking about West Point, for example, the Elkhorn River runs right through the middle of it, but they're not designated as voiding. That would be an HHS. The program moved over with HHS, so it is here now. So NDE would be the agency that would do that. So we just really need to strategically look at those areas and prioritize to start doing that.
And just to give you an update on the Hastings area right now, we're contracted with HCNR. We're gonna remodel our entire wildlife protection area. We need to update it, specifically looking at the impact of the ASR project we have and how we've changed the flow of groundwater. We're running out of dirty water, which is a good thing. And we need to look at to moving and probably build a lower extraction well to get more of the dirty water to provide more protection. So
yeah,
those are the kinds of things when we look at that, we're looking at Juniata and Kennesaw and Pride. I mean, we're taking clear of the Platte River.
You want to explain what your ASR project is?
Okay, really?
Nutshell.
I mean, I
Okay.
pretty quickly, but.
Hey, we have a project where it's called the Aquifer Storage and Restoration Project. A lot of times you'll see ASR is called Aquifer Storage and Recovery. what we're doing is just slightly different, same kind of cookie, just a little different recipe. In that what we're doing is we're taking contaminated groundwater, we're treating it with RO, we're blending it back into with some water that's untreated that comes from the lower aquifer because we really need that calcium. We need to make sure that's stabilized. But we're injecting it, upgrading of the city's well field. So instead of banning all those wells, we're basically just creating this mound of clean water coming in. But we're not replacing all the water we need. We're only replacing a portion of it because we just need to get the nitrate levels down. So what we're trying to do is restore the groundwater by adding some additional clean water into the system. And then because we're extracting it, we're trying to pull the nitrates away from the city of Hastings. So it's a management plan. And so far, it's worked pretty good. We're pretty happy with it. Possibly another 20-year pilot study, but that's what it is.
The other thing is we have maps and we designate areas at DNR of like your surface water, groundwater connectivity. And I think that's a really important point too. So I mean, we could add that into the analysis as well. And what you could kind of do is identify where those surface water, groundwater area interconnections are in relation to wellhead protection areas to some extent. And I mean, it kind of goes along with what Laura was talking about with the Quiddy.
Yeah, I just had a comment on the wellhead protection area, working with NRCS as long as I have. We, and Tatiana and Aaron Hurd and I have had discussions about this, but we have a conservation stewardship program where farmers bring in information about how they farm. And I've worked in like 17 counties over the last 15 years with that program. And the wellhead protection area comes up quite a bit. So we ask questions to the farmer. And I'm always interested, at least in eastern Nebraska, that we just don't have the knowledge, our producers don't have the knowledge of how the wellhead protection area works. I think we talked about the educational conduit through NDE and how we can make that better. And for instance, you know, if I ask a farmer that's got the wellhead protection area, land in that wellhead protection area, what some best management practices are, I'm probably not necessarily going to get an answer, or even adjacent to the wellhead protection area. They might know where the sign is. You know, as they drive through the county, they might see a wellhead protection area sign. And then the other component to that, just real quick, was like for NRCS employees, a better conduit to train our employees is exactly what you talked about, connectivity and things like that. So what the deep meaning of the wellhead protection area is, I think would be good for our employees to learn more about, so we can talk, like we know what we're talking about. You know, we have a good educational aspect or component to speaking of the wellhead protection area.
Brad, I just want to back up to something Barney touched on earlier. And that's just the idea of working with some of the smaller communities. And I guess that's one of the things that I think is fundamental to this effort is building capacity, particularly for smaller communities. Marty's doing a great job with Hastings, but he has a lot of resources, you know, compared to Alma or Hay Springs or wherever. So I think that should be one of our fundamental focuses is helping smaller communities. You know, you go talk to these smaller communities, yeah, they're worried about water quality, but they're also filling potholes, they're also mowing grass, they're doing everything, you know, on a shoestring budget. At the Lower Platte South NRD, we're working with Tatiana and Albert to establish a dedicated drinking water protection specialist position. You know, and again, we got some advantages in that case, but I think that sort of approach, whether it's through the NRDs, NRCS or whatever, to actually provide some of those resources for the smaller communities, you know, in essence, basically take over the wellhead protection activities for some of those smaller communities that just aren't going to have the horses to do it on their own. You know, we're talking about talking to producers and helping them understand what a wellhead protection area is and what can and can't go on, those sorts of things. To my thought, we need those boots on the ground before we're going to be really successful in this effort.
So
I'd like to echo that. You know, the gorilla in the room is the state's a wellhead protection area. And as agriculture goes, we have got to figure out how to build the confidence and the trust between us, between producers and the relationships of the entities and the expectations, and all of us work together. And that is a frustration of mine is is working within UNL and Doherty Water for Food. I sit on the advisories to those, and how do we do that? And well, there's a lot of horsepower in this room in terms of the statutory and regulatory side. How do we develop that process and take the dollars that we have available? The city of Hastings, I remember during the Water Sustainability Fund with Senator Carlson, that was a model, and you just refreshed my memory around that. And it's those kind of efforts. How do we expand it? But the grill in the room is production agriculture. And if we're expected to grow corn for feedlots and hogs and chickens and everything else that's driving our economy. But that also is inherent, like Brett said, the nature of having to have nitrogen, nitrates, and other pesticides, quite frankly, that have to do that. How do we build that trust? Is there anybody from the WICS team, the Water and Integrated Cropping Systems from UNL in this room? That might be a place to start, is how do we figure this out? There's some extension educators, but believe me, I get fired up about this, about how we can figure out how to build that trust and move past the discussion stage and the small areas to understanding that our entire state is a wellhead protection area today. I think that's where we're headed. Sorry, I got on a rant.
Can I jump on that a little bit too? So when I was doing wellhead protection, Tatiana and I kind of talked about this. I had a lot of communities that wanted to do stuff and they had resource issues, but one of the other issues was if they put any ordinances down, if they put any regulations down, I can't tell you how many towns said farmer such and such has millions of dollars and he's going to drag us through court. So we don't, basically they would back off on doing that just because of that conflict that they could possibly have with wealthy farmers in the area, to be totally honest with you. So one of the things that, I was trying to do is build relationships. But I mean, I know the farmers have relationships with the communities already, but I think there's a thought divide sometimes of that's not my water, right? Because they usually live out of town. They're not necessarily attached to that water system. They're also, I mean, theoretically polluting their own water system. So building better relationships between the communities and the farmers, so there's more cooperative communication and work that people do instead of that kind of weird conflict zone that they're afraid to do something because they don't want to get drugged to court because they don't have the money to deal with it.
Just so we don't end there.
Yeah.
And this is not gonna be something anyone wants to hear either, but boards that represent a public water system have a legal responsibility for that system. So for them to not take action means that if action is not taken, the state can take it.
Yeah.
So they're kind of between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah. It's a weird place to be, but I think to me, it was always about getting the relationship built, because I think if everybody feels an ownership to their local water, then they will work cooperatively together.
Yeah, I would echo what Sam's saying too. And I know the communities that I've worked with and been able to be out in the room with and have that discussion with producers who know a lot about their wells and where they're screened and their local aquifer. That gap starts to close between whose water is what, and those relationships are really important. But I think as everybody in the room here knows, it takes time and it takes, boots on the ground to establish those relationships. And a lot of us don't have enough people, the people that we need to be doing that long term. So that's another thing that, to Rourke and Dick's point, how do we expand those boots on the ground?
I guess what I'd like to do is offer some maybe positive things. I agree. I think one of the biggest challenges we have is so much misinformation that comes out. We have a group of farmers who just absolutely hate everything that we try to do. I mean, let's be honest, I'm a bit blunt. I'm too old not to, wait this out, but we have others that do a really good job. And so, we're trying to figure out how to deal with that problem. And we're asking your help. I'm here to learn. We're trying to reach out. One of the things that we are going to do right now, we've got some land around our wellhead protection areas that's city owned. We've just, it came up that we had new contracts for the producers to be farming in. We are requiring them to put cover crops on. We are going to switch some of the land out to hay, prairie hay. We know it's gonna take a while to get established, but we're willing to reduce the rent to do that. We've heard a lot that this may be a fairly good cash crop in the Hastings area, just with horse racing and all these things that are going on. Once we separated this idea that you're pushing this on us to the point is we're gonna work with you to reduce the rent fees. We are going to help you get some monies to do this. It's amazing they switched to, hey, how can we be part of this? We have extended our contracts from a 3-year program to a 10-year program. So what I'm saying is, as a community, we're gonna put some money in there and we're gonna make the investment because we believe it's gonna work. And we're working with some renters who, have said, yes, do it. And the ones that are not getting on board, they're losing the land. So I think demonstrating and putting some money where you're talking is important. We also have another reason for it, and Albert's gonna help me out here. We also have a watershed issue because we got the lake is, filling up. It's gonna be all part of that. But I think we just need someplace where we can step up and say, let's do it and contribute, something to that.
So a follow-up, are any of those producers, are they participating now in EQIP and getting?
Well, I'm glad you said that. I was trying to keep my, but one of the things we've told them is you need to get with the EQIP, you need to get with the NRCS, you need to get with the NRDs. That's all part of it. So we're looking at how they can get the funding. We're gonna help them with that. We've just got areas out there that we used to put a lot of corn and soybeans on it. We had one area where the guy did a great job of mixing alfalfa, corn and soybeans. Unfortunately passed away, but he was tied in with the feedlot. I mean, he was, son, and they had a use for the alfalfa. So it was a great program. Now we got to get that back, that concept of this crop rotation and so forth. So
so what you're describing there fits perfectly with what we're doing. We need to connect with those folks that talk about crop rotations and we can get them some payments. To do that, so.
One of the things I guess is an advantage to us is a lot of this land is also around the airport. So there are requirements for the height of that crop. So they're already into the point where they were still growing wheat and, soybeans and milo and that. So we just want to, we're going to take advantage of those farmers. So.
And then any of those producers that you're working with, are they willing, or maybe they're doing nutrient management, where they've got a plan for, time and amount and.
I don't know that we've gotten that deep into it, and quite frankly, we're not the experts in that, so we need some help, but, we're telling them that you need to do these kinds of things. We think with the cover crops being required, that will get them more into it. Now, the lands that we actually own with utilities, we are actually making them provide us a detailed crop analysis or soil analysis. That's just, part of their agreement. So we are making them get the data. For some of the city properties around the airport doesn't have the monies to do that.
Have you tried a peer network? In other words, try to convene a group of young producers or producers to be your champion?
I've tried the younger farmers out there. Didn't get too far because dad's still, kind of running the shows, most of them. But I am working with the Central Community College with the Adam Central School System. There's only so much they can do. I just recently reached out to the Farm Bureau and had a really good conversation with them, and they expressed the same thing. They're a little frustrated that we've got farmers that talk but don't always do. So we're trying, but I represent government, so I don't get my foot in the door.
We're here to help.
But I do want to go back to comment about the cover crop. I was kind of surprised by this, but apparently around an airport, they do not want root vegetables like carrots And apparently airports have this idea, or at least that group says that if you don't do it right, the carrot could give off an odor in the, spring, when you fill it up. And, that they think that the people that are flying in would be objectionable to that. So we said that's fine. If you don't want, hey, I'm just telling you, I took the idea that was, hey, as long as you're gonna put any kind of cover crop in there, I'm happy with it, so I wasn't gonna fight that battle, but thought I would share.
I was just gonna comment, I feel like, and maybe I don't wanna speak out of place, but being on the detail that I've been on and being with the beginning farmers and being in Walker Creek for so long, we really try, and I feel the pain of trying to get these things moving. We had right before COVID, we had a group of farmers come in and we had a great turnout. The only thing I apologize is because maybe on the field office side, we just didn't quite understand the whole idea behind NWQI. Fast forward now, we've actually met with some stakeholders with Albert, and we recently had Carla Paula from NDE and UNL. She had done a presentation and a video with Katie Pekarik, and I apologize, I can't remember who all was involved, but showing that to that group would have been phenomenal, because there was a lot of, and I don't mean this way it sounds, but I'm a mom. And if I would have saw that, knowing the blue baby syndrome, all these other effects, I would have looked at my husband and been like, what in the world are we doing? So I do feel like communication, collaboration is huge. And we are, the whole state is a wellhead. Everybody has wells. I mean, whether you're in the city, you're in a wellhead protection.
If I could comment, some of my best recipients of the message have been the Red Hat ladies. They're great.
Yeah.
The League of Women Voters, because they go back and they are actually stakeholders that sometimes we don't think about.
Yeah.
And they carry a pretty good message.
And
They've been great to work with.
We have a group of stakeholders that we've and it's very small, but we feel like they're very impactful. Their concern is, how do we cold turkey? How do we just stop? And I think that's what they're afraid of. And that's not what we're trying to tell them. I just watched, I was telling Brock, I watched a video with CNNBC, and they talked about farming and how actual cropland yields are going up even with less acres. So the acres are getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and they're able to produce more on less acres. So the concern is, they just don't want to change necessarily right away or what they're doing, but they're actually the ones who can do it on a smaller scale. Think 5 acres of alfalfa, start small, do your soil test. Preaching to the choir here really is probably the bigger picture, but I just wanted to comment on that because I agree with Sam and Tatiana that, you can communicate, but you have to have champions too. You have to have somebody who's willing to champion that spot, so.
Okay, I'm gonna take 1 or 2 more comments and then we're gonna transition.
Yeah, so Aurora, to answer your question, I am a WICS educator. I'm the only one in here. But as you're talking about boots on the ground and educators of like the wellhead areas, that's exactly what a lot of the WICS educators should be doing or are doing. And they are the ones that know the local gym. I'm a statewide educator, so a little different, but the county-based ones are definitely know the local champions, the ones that really buy into what they're saying. And so I know there's a lot of WICS educators, but potentially ones in wellhead areas or priority areas. And I know we're going to talk about getting different people in the room later on, but definitely people we can utilize and talk to. They have the skill set. Carla as well as a WICS educator who made those WICS videos. So yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna do 1 more comment and then we're gonna transition. Aaron, did you have?
Just a comment about the cover crop use and around airports. It's tricky. There's some biologists that are interested in working on a cover crop kind of exploration or experiment here in Lincoln, and with the community crops, we're considering that. And one of the adverse impacts of brassicas is that when they're rotting, I've heard it differently than that. It's usually the fear of a natural gas leak. And so they get some calls typically around those rotting fields about a leak in the pipeline. And so, yeah, airports are real sensitive to that. beyond that, I think there's a lot of strategies that we could employ that would totally avoid the restrictions. Keep some low vegetation, try not to attract wildlife is the key. And so some really tall standing dead residue actually does a really great job of deterring geese, which is the main problem. But yeah, I think my inclusion in this discussion is just to draw attention to Tatiana and her efforts to form some strategic plans around some network development. And I feel like that really answers a lot of the things that have been brought forward, is just bringing a team of people to each one of these scenarios and working on them with all of our strengths and all of the resources we all individually bring each agency, and then just addressing those in continued discussions like this, and having an item on the agenda next time to talk about your issue. And then we can form some synergy in that.
Yeah, good, okay. Well, we need to transition now to the surface water.
You see the comment on the.
Okay, so, but
Yeah, it's a good point.
it's also good to invite the stable consultants for crops and irrigation, those that directly work with produce. Invite to the table, not table. So I'd say yes, we'll consider that. Okay, so I think next, Tara, you're ready?
Yeah, I'm just gonna hang out over here and.
Yeah, we'll transition into the surface water now, and we'll have some discussion on that.
That's okay.
Second floor.
If you just go to the pretty river pictures. Or I guess I have control.
Yeah.
All right. So again, I'm Tara Anderson. I'm the Water Quality Standards Coordinator at NDE. And I just kind of wanted to give a little context to how we determine how water bodies are either meeting our water quality goals or they are what we call impaired. And I just wanted to point out this picture. I took this photo. It's on East Verdigris Creek, up by Grove Lake Wildlife Management Area. I was fly fishing for trout on this stream. It's a cold water stream. It's beautiful. I think it's probably one of the best streams, aside from maybe like the Niobrara River out west, that we have in the state. So NDE administers the Clean Water Act, many of the Clean Water Act programs. And one of those is creating water quality standards. Water quality standards establish the legal basis for regulatory Clean Water Act programs and actions. They also establish publicly stated goals of the desired quality of surface waters of the state. There are three components of water quality standards: the designation of beneficial uses, and then assigning specific criteria to protect those designated uses, and then some anti-degradation provisions. So as I mentioned, the first component is designating the beneficial uses. Recreation is, I guess, to go back. Designated beneficial uses are any productive use of surface water quality or surface waters, which water quality should be protected. The first one that I like to talk about is recreation. It's where water bodies have the high potential to be used for activities for recreation. So think swimming, canoeing, as a child playing with rocks and looking for interesting things. Next one is the protection for aquatic life. This is to specifically protect fish and aquatic insects and anything that's in the water, but also our use of those animals, so fishing. And these two are basically the basis of the Clean Water Act. The goal of the Clean Water Act is that all surface waters can be fishable or swimmable. We also have agricultural water supply, public drinking water supply. We have 27 designated water bodies, streams that are designated as public drinking water supply. They're both surface water intakes as well as the groundwater under the influence of surface water. We have industrial water supply and aesthetics. We do a lot of surface water monitoring. We get about 50,000 data points of water quality data every year. And that helps us to assess whether those designated beneficial uses are being met. This is a lot to look at, but this is just to point out that we take all of those data points and we assess all of the data against the designated beneficial uses for every stream that we have data and lake. Across the top, we have those uses. On the left, we have the names of the streams. For each use, we determine whether a water body is impaired. So is it meeting that goal or is it not? If it's not, then it's impaired. On the right, you'll see what it's impaired for. So in this particular case, the aquatic life is impaired for a couple of different unknown or copper and ammonia. And then here is a map of all of the Title 117 designated streams. Red and orange are impaired water bodies. Blue, the dark blue and the light blue are basically supporting their designated uses. This is all impairments, everything that we assess for. I think specifically to this subcommittee, we are able to influence point sources pretty well. That's what's covered under the Clean Water Act. What's not covered is non-point source pollution. And the number one impairment that we have in Nebraska is for E. coli. So again, the blue, it's kind of hard to see, isn't it? The blue water bodies are supporting, so those are what we would expect you could get into and not, the potential to get sick from being in that water body is low. Where you see the orange, those are impaired. So they have hit over what we would, our criteria for recreation. And the gray just means that we don't have data at this point. We haven't been able to assess it. Health impacts of E. coli. We kind of use E. coli as an indicator. It's easy to collect and it's easy to assess for, but their epidemiological studies have shown a very close and positive correlation between levels of E. coli and other gastrointestinal pathogens. So although we're only looking at E. coli, there's potential for other fecal contamination in those impaired water bodies. Another one that we look at for non-point source pollution is atrazine. Again, so can you guys see those numbers? Is there a way to blow up the or not? Maybe.
29, 30.
So the criteria to protect aquatic life in Nebraska is 12 micrograms per liter. So streams where we find atrazine greater than that would be considered impaired. And we have a public drinking water supply, MCL, of 3 micrograms per liter.
And I think probably the point I'd like to make about E. coli and atrazine impairments is that we really see spikes when there's been a runoff event. E. coli doesn't really survive very well in water, so their numbers aren't going to be really high unless there's coming from an overland runoff source, as well as atrazine. We assess atrazine in May and June because we've looked throughout the year, and really we know that that's when it's being applied, and that's when we were seeing the biggest spikes.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, please.
So there's only, what, 24 stream segments that have a designated use for public drinking water supply. So there could be data that indicates that a drinking water use is impaired, but because the use isn't assigned, it's not assessed. Same with primary contact recreation.
Correct.
So maybe a lot of those gray streams have data, but because they don't have the use, we can't say that there's an impairment. So that would be maybe the stream flow is so low that a kid could not submerge themselves. They couldn't actually recreate.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. So there are human health impacts of atrazine, reproductive system impacts, as well as potentially some cancers. I think ecologically, it can reduce primary productivity in water system, which result in food web disruptions and loss of biodiversity, as well as there are documented adverse reproductive effects in amphibians and some other wildlife. If you want to touch on this, Albert.
Yeah, again, it's not by any means exhaustive, but some of the classic things that we look at in atrazine would be the timing of application. So you can avoid applying it right before a big rainstorm. Certainly stop the runoff, prevent it, split application, of putting part of the atrazine down earlier and then following up with an application later. Again, you're avoiding some of those runoff events. Buffer strips kind of a 2-for-1. One, if you have a good buffer strip and you don't apply the atrazine close to the stream, you don't have it close. Buffer strip gives you kind of a natural setback. And then also you get some filtration as water runs through that. And then the big one we're trying to push is alternative chemistries. Those different pesticides are usually more expensive. As Brett said, we use a lot of atrazine because it's cheap and effective. So I don't think anybody's advocating that you make a total change, but one of the side benefits, atrazine, certain weed species out there have developed resistance. So we're kind of pushing, if you, not a total conversion, but every few years you put a different chemistry on there, and it's kind of using a herbicide rotation to kind of break that cycle on resistance. For E. coli practices, buffer strips again gives you a chance for water running off to filter through, and physical barriers actually do help hold that E. coli from running off and let it die off naturally. A big thing is livestock in the streams, so getting controlled access, either completely fencing about the stream or having, if it's your water supply, limiting where they can enter that stream, how long they stay in there. We really push rotational grazing management, putting a well further out into the pasture so it's away from the stream. Numerous studies are showing cattle would rather go drink out of a tank than drink out of the stream. Apparently the water tastes better. And there are studies showing you actually get better productivity, weight gain, and so forth by having an alternate water supply. Manure storage and management, working with producers to kind of create storage facilities that limit runoff from manure piles or whatever. Manure management, again, timing of application when you put it on the fields and not applying it really close to the streams. And then water diversion, if you got a feedlot and water from 40 acres is flowing through that feedlot, creating a diversion so the water goes around it and not through it, picking up the E. coli is one of the advantages of trying to reduce that in the stream. So lots more practices. These were just kind of food for thought.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Do you have any idea the volume of manure it would take to take a score on your testing of the water? Is it like tons and tons, or is it 1 or 2 cow pies?
Related cow pies to culinary. Yeah, the actual individual bacterias.
Because I think a lot of producers think, well, I'm not part of the problem.
Well, and I would point out that the E. coli, without looking at an eDNA type of study.
Yeah.
You know, there's a lot of things that it's not, you know, it's not just cows. It's also coming from wildlife, human sources, but so I don't think we've ever quantified. I think the eDNA is at a point where I think you can start to quantify who is contributing that. So that might be something to look at.
I'm familiar with that, and yeah, I think it's multifactorial usually, but it would just be interesting to think. Because some small, I used to work in Hebron and some small land or like livestock facilities, just a couple hundred head, they're like, well, I'm not putting that much in the stream. Well, that much probably is enough.
Right.
And it'd be interesting just to quantify that.
I'd like to echo that.
What's up?
I don't think it take very many cattle if they're right in the stream, especially if they're just upstream from your sampling site.
And I think like the, oh, go ahead.
I'd like to echo that question of you as well too. We use a lot of poultry and composted manure, and now we use a product out of Kansas called Prairie Food, which is a processed manure, and we apply it with a sprayer. So I guess we just need to get together and have the conversation, but that intrigues me because we'll apply a couple ton of compost per acre. I guess I don't know what that means in terms of the ability for us to contribute to that. That would be, I'd like to somehow figure that out, I guess. That's a great question.
Yeah, another thing about the E. coli test is it's actually looking at what's called colony forming units. So this is live E. coli. And so, you know, a processed manure is, or like that's probably not contributing a live E. coli to the system. Maybe other things, but I think the biggest takeaway is just stopping putting in buffer strips or some way to reduce the overland flow of water from getting into surface waters is the biggest takeaway.
Yeah, where we see our spikes in E. coli are when we have high flows. So it's
very positively it's very correlated to so.
And I would probably add to this a little bit, something to think about as far as where in the state we're doing efforts and who we're trying to get to adopt things. From like a DNR standpoint and a water quantity perspective, there are places in the state where it might be a little difficult to get certain people to do certain practice buy-ins because they're like saying the Republican, we literally account for every drop of water that we have. We are very conscious of when you're reducing stream flow and that kind of thing. So one of the things too would be just for us to collaborate and you guys be aware of areas where you have a little bit, you have a compact, you have some other kind of thing in place that's looking at how much water is actually in the stream and let's figure out a way where you guys can still get adoption of these type of things while not negatively impacting what producers or NRDs have to do for compact compliance and things like that.
It'll get some stream through groundwater.
Yeah, I'm aware, but it's something that like our NRD managers, and the Republican, I mean, they were so focused on the Republican compact and the Supreme Court and all the lawsuits. They're now just starting to look at water quality stuff. It just wasn't on the toppest of their priority. And that's one of the things that I've heard from them, because I try to kind of push both the water quality and quantity piece. I think there's a way around it, but it's also educating too, right? To like help them understand. You may be impacting here, but maybe you're adding to it here. So just something to think about.
One other thing that I would just ask, is there a way or a program where landowners that are directly putting discharge from their septic tank into a stream without a leach field? I know that's a compliance issue, but is there a way to like help them
Yeah, if they,
convert to a leach field?
Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, we started the program back in 2005. If you're within one of our, I'll touch on that later, one of our priority areas, which is our 9-element watershed management plan, we have a component for septic system replacements. We had to do a little dance around that because there are certain compliance issues. I believe it was 2000 that we changed the design recommendations. So we basically made it, it's not a failed system, but if it's a system that doesn't meet current standards as of 2000, they would be eligible for replacement. And I've lost count. The last count I had was close to 200 systems that we've replaced through those projects. So now, the bad part of it is that it's not statewide. We don't have the money to do it statewide, but we do it within these priority management areas.
I just know that's a big elephant in the room, and you know, those landowners don't talk about it.
Yeah.
And they don't want you to know about it. But if in these priority areas, we had like a targeted mailing that said, hey, if you have a non-compliant sewer system, we have some money. And we could come in and voluntarily, non-compliance wise, design a system with you and pay for it. I think
we pay up to 60%.
Well, there you go. I mean, partner, cost share, that's what we're familiar with.
I think our biggest hurdle for that is that it needs to be in a priority area within our a watershed management plan. We can't necessarily do it statewide.
No, it can't be statewide. In our priority watershed, 9-element watershed plan, our project has to be limited to no more than 20% of that whole watershed. We did make the septics available throughout that watershed, usually with priority being in the priority area or priority being on the stream corridor. So it's there. It's just not a statewide. I'd love to have some statewide program, but.
Well, even that, I mean, just making folks aware of that and just maybe just
Your senators.
talk to us conservationists in a training opportunity about that program so that we can be your face and tell those landowners about it. That's the exact synergy that we're looking for.
As far as I know, we're the only people that actually actively recruit people to do that. Some states through their non-point source programs sort of backdoor it. But nobody else seems one touch the funding. We have had a couple of NRDs now have stepped up, and when we first started it, the NRDs wanted nothing to do with cost sharing septic systems. So we have 2 of them now that have agreed to throw in some funds.
What are those 2 NRDs?
Papio I know is one, and I think Lower Platte North now has agreed to do some cost share on it.
I hate to jump in too much, but the city of Hastings, we recognize that those septic tanks could be an issue, especially if they're not abandoned properly. We do provide cost share to anybody that wants to properly abandon a septic tank in Leachfield.
And I think Auburn does that as well.
Yeah.
Or they have in the past.
Be-
Yes.
But just don't get that many, and quite frankly, if there's no inspection that's going on out there, not that plumbers will purposely do things, but they are always being asked to do it on the cheap, and that's what you get. It's,
All you can do is hang the carrot out there, but if nobody knows the carrot's there, then that's also a problem.
and even just working with people who take out old farmsteads, you know, and just say, hey, we can get you some money, but sometimes that doesn't even happen, so. So,
I think that was a good segue into, the water quality management programs between DE and NRCS, so. Go into the,
Yeah, I guess I'll touch on that one. The colored areas are areas where we have, we call it 9-element watershed management plan. Some of them are district-wide. Usually for us, we have to plan can't exceed a HUC-8. So that's just a map. The bigger polygons there are where we have plans that cover that entire watershed. Get to the project level. Project has to focus on 20% or less of that area. The stars are, we really, in the last few years, worked very closely with the wellhead protection and source water protection program. So those are areas where we've developed source water protection plans, which we've wrapped into eligibility under the non-source program. I won't go into all of them, but that having those management plans makes them eligible for Section 319 funds, and we work with the NRDs, we work with the NRCS and other partners to bring resources in to implement those. So I think that's enough on that. And Tatiana, there's your next slide coming up.
Oh, well, we were just kind of talking about illuminating some of the interconnectivity between groundwater and surface water, in case anybody is not familiar. But there are a lot of places in the state where groundwater discharges to surface water. If you're looking at the upper left figure there, that's the gaining stream. So where you have the hydraulic head or the water table above, kind of like that base flow of a creek, you're gonna have groundwater interacting and discharging out to that creek. So in places where we have situations with high nitrate in groundwater and we have surface water that is, I guess I'll say, you know, not contaminated, we have a definite potential situation where we could be discharging that high nitrate water into creeks. And I guess I will just point to, there's some people in the room who are way more knowledgeable about this. So with the overlap between NWQI and source water protection, when we're looking at the interconnectedness between groundwater and surface water, I know Brazil is doing a lot, and then Laura helped to write that Brazil plan. And then we have Annette in the room, and then also with the Wilbur and Turkey Creek project, Sam was very active in that. So I don't know if any of you guys want to kind of speak to the partnerships between source water and groundwater, surface water stuff in your areas and that.
What exactly are you looking for there, I guess? And I mean, we have, like, we could try water and surface water interaction, and we work closely with NRCS on the NWQI area as well as.
Yeah, so I get that, just the opportunity there is that our program can support NWQI in the form of cost share, or a lot of times we could potentially fund things that maybe aren't fundable under cost share with NWQI. So just kind of going through those figures, to reverse it, you have something like the middle figure there, a losing stream, you have surface water discharging into groundwater. So that relationship is also happening across the state. And then even where you don't have that hydraulic connectivity directly, you still have potential leaching from a losing stream that enters the groundwater. So just kind of a quick slide to just show how interconnected these things are. And I know Brad and Britt talked
I do
about
have
that.
a comment on that though, Tatiana, because the partnership is critical in having people gain interest in participating in the program. It's been really critical in canvassing the producers in the area as well as the communities, getting the information out, which is one of the hardest things, is getting that initial buy-in, getting people to recognize the concerns and that local impact. Even if they know the local impact, it can be tough to get that move to action. So that's been critical with the coverage from the NRDs, NDEE, NRCS, and other organizations. It's really helped. However, the biggest thing we're facing now, so we've got the call to action, people are starting to do things, but as soon as they do them and the cost share ends, they quit. Yep. And so we don't have that long term, even if we get them called in. So all those funds have been put there, we see good things, and then we hit the cliff and we fall off. And that's where we're at right now. So another bright spot on how do we get this thing important? It's important, but we need to get it moving.
I'll add to that, because you talked about funding and when funding drops off. And so what was important about Brazil was, so when you talk about Clean Water Act, you talk about surface water. So groundwater is left to the state, we co-regulate with the NRDs, but what Brazil did is and East Branch Verdigris Creek, which was your starting picture, is in Brazil. And we used that area, we used wells and the surface water data to show EPA that there was a connection there. And that essentially the area, everybody we know here, we drink groundwater, but EPA, Region 7 and headquarters don't know our situation intimately like we do. So Brazil closed the gap there, and it opened up half of the 319 funds for groundwater projects that address a public health need. So that, leads back to the program here, and we've continually funded Brazil. And, when I think as a grant runs out, we fund another one because we realize that it's important to keep those practices going, and that would not have been possible had we not proven the connection to EPA. So.
And then we kind of took another step forward, and I mean, this is kind of in Tatiana's wheelhouse now as well, we tapped onto that and EPA being willing to fund groundwater work, and we tried to help, I guess, leverage the funding for communities to do drinking water protection management plans, which was basically the 9-element watershed plan, but focused on a well protection area. It really is just helping with the planning of that so that they can then work with the NRDs to go forward to do more 319. So they could actually get 319 funding. I mean, Tatiana can speak of where that is now as well. The other thing I wanted to mention, and I don't know if Rorik probably can speak to this a little bit better than I can, is I think one of the things that's important is once that funding goes away, how do you get farmers and producers to continue? I think it's really important to get back to their return on investment, getting farmers to look at their inputs, the cost of their inputs, being more efficient. How do they actually make money? Because to me, and what my experience working with farmers is, if you can give them a means to be environmental, help their local communities, help their water quality, and make sure that their bottom line is improving, that's kind of a winning issue. And I think that's one of the ways to kind of help get that adoption. The TAPS program, so God, I don't even know what testing agricultural work, help me, practices. It's a competition that UNL puts on out at North Platte that allows farmers, and like DNR participates every year with the team, and some NRDs do as well, where farmers basically can go and try different practices. They can try different strategies. They can try they have access to different technology to help them better make management decisions. And so that program or that competition is focused on the number one prize is who's the most profitable, then it's who's the most efficient, and then the third prize is the highest yield, but it's from a perspective of you only get the prize money if you're based on your percentage of how close you are to efficient, I think is the most profitable or most efficient is. So it's trying to get farmers to look away from how much their yield is and look at how much they're profiting. So I don't know, Rourke, maybe you can speak more on that kind of concept, but I think that's also key to maybe getting people to continue doing stuff after the cost share funding goes away.
The TASC program is
Sam,
also
that,
digital version of that now that they're working to help incorporate and bring in more people.
Yeah. Rourke, if you want to.
so, so certainly those are tools. I participate in Oklahoma and TAPS as well too. And now we're trying to work with developing a curriculum for the 11th and 12th grade with Tiffany Hang Moss and at UNL through the ESU system, ESU 16 in Ogallala, North Platte, with the FFA and the ag students. I mean, there's a lot of things going on here. And what excites me the most about this, and I would really like everybody to think about this, is we're circling back around and around and around to the same things. Brett, you and I had this conversation multiple times. Many of us did around the room, a lot of familiar faces. How do we continue to convene this amount of horsepower around the room and come up with a plan? And I think that's, I would hope and I would expect that could be a great piece of this, because we all bring the data that I mean, we have this stuff done. How do we influence, how do we drive, or how do we help sustain that adoption and the continuation? I'm one of those guys. I'm an early adopter. I have a whole shed full of sensors and stuff, but we landed on a process that helps us. And so I don't think there's any one particular piece that is more or less compelling. It's the fact that it's all compelling. And how do we get everybody, agency wise, producer wise, all the way around to be able to rally around this? I think we've gone too long. I really do. And it really is time for a call for action.
I've got really one quick question, and hopefully it doesn't go out too far and we can talk about this later, and I'm gonna go back to what guys well said, and I'll pick on Sam here a little bit. Is that, it's exactly one of the problems we see is that you give the carrot, you give the money, and then they don't follow through. And I'm very concerned about how do I engage those producers with that. I need something better than saying that what you have is a environmental welfare program. I know that sounds bad, but all they do is they're just looking for that handout. So sometimes we need to have terminology that gets to the root of it. And I'm just gonna go back to something I understand. When we talk about biosolids, it's a really nice thing coming out of a wastewater treatment plant, but it's pretty foul. But if you have the right terminology, you can get some of his attention. I don't like the words environmental welfare, but really that's the best I've got. I'm looking for some help. How can I explain it in terms that's not offensive, but yet get to the heart of the matter, that we just kind of have some people that are just waiting around for that money to come in and then they go back to the old ways.
Yeah, they're great comments. We talk about that all the time.
I feel like that's so loaded. I mean, I don't know that I think we're still trying to figure that out, right? I mean, that's one of the biggest.
I mean, that would help when we communicate with these producers, and I don't have the tools available to start the conversation and keep them engaged.
Yeah, so the idea is that they will learn to implement the practice and it will be beneficial to them and they'll continue to do it after. That's a challenge.
But when producers are getting the assistance for some of these programs, are they required to provide any type of outlets as far as statistics? Or are they just getting the money? We did it, here's our receipts, thank you. I mean, there was some requirement that they actually had to show you the numbers, show us the numbers. At least that forces them to look at it, see it on paper that this worked.
Yeah, so So they're required to implement the practice, complete the practice, and they have to provide the documentation. The outcomes is what we measure, as to what the result was, you know, how many tons of soil were prevented from moving, how many tons of atrazine and nitrates. Admittedly, we don't have really good metrics for measuring the outcomes, so that's something that we need to work on as well. But to answer directly your question, a producer gets a contract typically, and they're obligated to that contract until the contract's terminated. And so, I mean, that's kind of how that works. But yes, we need to get them convinced that that practice is useful, helpful, and so that they will continue to implement that practice after the payments. And that's not easy.
I was just gonna ask, what practices in Brazil Creek are they implementing? Because we had in Wahoo Creek, a lot of times we were doing terraces and tile outlets, which, you know, probably supporting, but not directly helping with the three water quality issues. So that, I was just kind of curious, and then I had another comment, but.
Most of what we're seeing right now are cover crop, irrigation, water management, and nutrient management.
Okay.
Three. I would say, unless Brett, you have other input on that, those are the three I remember being the top.
Yeah.
One of the things I want to add, though, what Marty said about the economic or the environmental welfare program is, it is an environmental welfare program, but most people aren't aware of why they're coming to the program in the first place.
Right.
If they're not envisioning the fact that they're having an impact on water quality and why that's important, and even if they do know they are, it's such a timeline of, you know, when you say it's 50 years before your groundwater is gonna be recharged by the water you're impacting.
Yeah.
That's a hard stuff.
I hear a lot of that, and I hear a lot of it from, but I don't have an agreement with this property owner to farm it for more than 5 years, so they just go get what they can out of it. That's why we looked at it and said, we're gonna go ahead 10-year program. We want to keep these people at least in there and make that. It's tough. I mean, when you're renting properties, it's really tough.
I think Sam hit it with the return on their investment, and that's where maybe the missing link is. You know, we really need to know from cattlemen's, you know, their rate of gain, you know, versus creek water, which is, you know, not the best, versus clean water. You know, that's gonna affect directly their return on their investment. Producers, their agronomists, that's probably who we should be targeting, maybe not because the only problem is they have a lot of turnover, so we do need to maybe connect with those co-ops and say, hey, can you work with us? We'll work with you, because they've got some internal programs they're using now that give credits for carbon and other climate smart practices. So they're really doing some of the things that we want them to do, but they're paying the producer. So if we could just connect that synergy between the two of us, it would really, I think, could make a big impact.
I'd like to see these agronomists get with these farm managers and say, we're gonna test this soil before this contract goes out. And at the end of that, we test it and see what was taken off of that soil and make sure it gets put back. Whether that's every year or at the end of it, you know, whatever, but there needs to be some look at it instead of just, well, I got so much money off this property. And I've got some connection with the community college. They have a lot of land that's doing it, and they're really looking hard at that. How can we continue to work with the same family for a long period of time, go to that next generation? Because obviously they teach, you know, ag things, but they're really looking at it saying, how can we improve these soils? So they, as an organization, recognize that they may have to save a few dollars coming into their foundation, but looking at that long term. And Mary Laney's doing the same thing, you know, because I've been working with it. So there's a lot of bright spots out there, but how do you get that to the majority of the folks at home, you know, 5,000 acres, and they're just looking to keep mom, you know, out of the retirement home. So
Well, I would add.
There's
Go ahead,
there's two fundamental numbers that you've talked about. Agronomists, you've talked about pieces of the puzzle, but the fundamental number is how much nitrogen does it take to grow a bushel of corn or another crop. And there are efforts out there to look at and reevaluate the efficiencies, that ROI model of what that looks like. But currently that number is 1.2. pounds of nitrogen per bushel. And arguably it can be something less than that. And there are other targets within other institutions that make it look different. But that, but the reality is today, it is a function of the infrastructure, the rolling stock that a producer has, and the infrastructure that they have to apply those. And multiple times we're having conversations around it. It's simple. Apply it 6 times. Well, they may not even have the ability to do it more than 3 times because that's the way they do it. And so when we make those kind of conversations or assumptions around what producers would like to do and expect to do, you're going from, adding today a strip tiller that has a lay-by or a Coulter side dress machine or wide drops on a sprayer, you're talking $250,000 investment. And you're talking about a producer that may only have 1,000 acres or a producer that may have 2,000. I mean, you roll those numbers back into those models. So the idea that we can make the assumption that we can bottle these groups and people into that, the cattlemen are in the same boat. You go from a 50 cow calf operation to an 800 head. The scale allows them, and we've talked about it today. Scale has implications and the ability to drive it. We assess our, what you call the NUE, and we just will start talking about it, is nitrogen use efficiency number. We just got done with ours from last year. It was 0.6 of the 1.2 that is expected. And a lot of researchers and a lot of people look at us, well, how did you do that? And we've invested in multiple applications, multiple assessment ways to do that. But given the confidence that producer has an ROI, so that when he shows up at the bank to pay back his operating loan or make his land payments or buy that next used tractor, you're exactly right. You're all dancing around the ROI piece. And so it is a fun dynamic to be able to influence that, but we're also asking them for a very small part of their day when we ask them to think about, okay, water quality. I think Connor, you said something about looking at the sign. That's the truth. is that kind of that refamiliarization? So this is a fun place to be, because we're right back where we are, circled around. How do we engage them? How do we think about this regionalization from Brazil all the way to, I have a well since 1974 that I purchased that started out at 2.6 parts per million on nitrates. 2.6. Today, that well today is nearly 12.8 parts per million. I've only owned it a year, but it's a result of a long-standing application. It's a very sandy soil. So we think we can fix it, but it's going to take time.
I would just add one thing to kind of what Rourke was saying as far as what we're expecting producers to do. So if they don't have their own equipment to do split applications or different application types, they will hire the co-op to come in and do it. And it's also about what's available to them. So when we were working in Wilbur, we did several source water protection grants with them. We were able to get, or their water operator, not me, was able to get all of the farmers in their well protection area to only do fall, or to not do any fall fertilization, and to basically do their spring fertilization and we started going into like split applications and that kind of thing too. But one of the biggest things that I heard from them was sometimes they do it because they only have access to that co-op to put it on a certain time of year. And so it was successful there. And I think that was, because of their local water operator was also a longtime farmer in the area and he knew everybody. But at the end of the day, it's also, do they have access to it coming onto their fields in the time that they need in remote areas in Nebraska where everybody's trying to hire that farmer or the co-op or whatever to come apply things for them. The other thing is, Tatiana, we should talk about this more and get you and Alexa talking. So we are also, DNR has the Healthy Soils Initiative, and that is just starting. The whole point of that with the legislature, and again, I'm not really sure why they gave it to DNR, but that's where it is to build like a farmer education type network around healthy soils. So one of the things I've talked to our director about is that all these things already exist. Maybe what we need to do at DNR is just tap into all the groups. So Tatiana, that's something, Alexa's gonna be helping with that a little bit.
I
So I
will
hope,
say we have already met,
Okay,
and
good.
actually Laura and Alexa are already working
awesome.
together.
Okay,
So.
perfect.
Okay, well, I asked for 2 hours of your time. You used up 2 hours of your time. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap it up. Yeah, the formal part, and then we can continue the conversation after, as much as you want to stick around. But, just wanted to touch on the NWQI and just kind of set the stage for future, meetings and things we have to get done. But, we've got the 3 implementation phase NWQIs currently in the state, Brazil, Turkey, and Big Sandy. Walking Creek is in the planning phase. We've got a lot of work to get done there to possibly move that back to the implementation phase. That all has to be done. The NWQI decisions have to be done by about July 1st. So we're almost kind of behind the curve already to, if we're gonna make changes. If we're gonna continue with what we have, then not a big deal. So I won't get into the practices too much. We will make these slides available, probably in the chat, so you can look through those. So for FY 24, similar to source water, we just need to evaluate the status of the 3 that we have. Do we want more? Can we handle more? Do we have enough technical assistance to do more? But we need to decide that. Every state's required to have at least 3, and we do have the 3. We can have more if we want to. Do we want to request new watersheds for FY 24? Can we handle more watersheds? Do we want to withdraw the current watersheds? If we're not getting any activity and we feel like we've done everything we can within the existing watershed, then maybe we withdraw them and we can make that request. And then new source water protection areas, which, the Brazil is now source water for the creek. That's that integration of surface and groundwater. So we need to take a look at what we have and then start the process now, especially if we're going to add new watersheds, or in the BQI that we request. We need to start making those decisions. So, then at the end, so I asked the question at the beginning, who else should be part of this committee? There are some folks that we may want to reach out to, or other organizations. Send me your recommendations. You can email them to me, Tammy Nordman, Connor Ward. Just reach out to us, and then we can reach out to those folks. If you think they need to be on the committee, be at the table, then maybe you can reach out to them and grease the skid a little bit too. So how often do we want to have this meeting? Maybe a little quick feedback here. We mentioned several things, and there's a lot of work to do. If we're going to make changes, those kind of things, practices, the priority watersheds, those kind of things. If everybody's good with the way we're going, with our practices, funding, then we don't need to meet too often for that purpose. I think we still need to meet to talk about the water quality issues in the state, because it goes beyond just these targeted funding sources, source water protection, NWQI. There's a state, there's a local programs, to get boots on the ground types of things. There's funding, for agreements, to do some of these things. Those things need to be discussed, and they need to be targeted, and we need to have all of you to have that input to us. There is funding, there is additional funding coming down called the Inflation Reduction Act. And we're just now beginning to see the impacts. But I don't think funds is going to be a limitation, let's just say that. for the next 5 years. Targeting those to be, have climate smart. A lot of it's climate smart, socially disadvantaged types of slants, but that could work in the water quality issues. And then typically we look outside the agency to see if somebody wants to chair the committee, just to get a broader view of what the committee needs to do, agenda items, setting up the schedule of meetings and those kind of things. I won't ask for any nominations here today, but give that some thought. And if somebody wants to step forward and be the chair of the committee, some of the duties then would be, with the agenda, reaching out to partners, those kind of things, and then reporting out to the state technical committee, with the actions and recommendations, those kind of things. So give that some thought. So I think in the interest of time, if you would just think about that, when do we need to have our next meeting? Reach back out to us through email. Do we need to have another meeting next week? We need to have another meeting in a month. Those kind of things. And then we'll send out a doodle poll like we did and try to get a time for that. So, I'm gonna say that's the end of the formal meeting. Great conversation. It's recorded. We're gonna capture all of those recommendations and put that together. So when we get the minutes done, I think we'll forward that back out to the group. You can look at it. If we missed something, just get back to us and then we get that added back in. But this is just the beginning today. I don't think there's many issues that are more important than water. And we'd like this to be the group. It doesn't have to be the only one, but especially when it comes to guiding the funding from the USDA sources. This is where it starts, and it's just recommendations to the state technical committee and recommendations to the state conservationists. But what comes out of the committees is taken very seriously and generally implemented. So with that, I'm going to formally close the meeting, but by all means, stick around and we can continue to have a conversation after this. So thank you.
Just a quick question. The minutes have who was here and who they're with.
Yep.
It'll have who is here. I don't necessarily put like they're with or who they're with, but I mean, I can do that to continue.
But we'll provide the email
Yeah,
address.
yeah, email.
You guys will not have it. We don't provide email addresses out, but I can, Brad and I can talk. We don't usually share everybody's email addresses, so that's just not something we do.
But they're on the meeting request, so we can always get them to that.
Yeah, they're right.
Back,
Yeah.
So, okay. Thanks.
I mean, everybody at least that was invited to the meeting today is on.
You shouldn't be able to see everybody's, but if they did, you can nominate. Yeah, put that.
That's a good question. Again, we'll get the minutes out.
Well, that's what I thought.
So that, we're adjourned. Thank you. Thank you for coming in. And like I say, feel free to spend whatever additional time you want. We'll hang around here for a while or so. Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Merry Christmas.